What's going on? And welcome back to another episode of the Court Storm College Hoops Talk podcast, which you can find right here on the Court Storm channel. My name is Kanaye, and I'm joined with my co-host Josh. And today we are bringing you guys some of our takeaways from some of the bigger games played over the last half week, going into this MTE week. So, of course, Players Era has already started on the day of this recording, Monday, November 24th. A lot more MTE games and big time matchups are on the way as well. But before we get into all of that today, please engage with the videos you see on this channel in any way you can, whether it's liking, subscribing, or just telling other people about the Court Storm channel. All goes a long way with influencing YouTube's algorithm and getting more people to watch our videos. So let's get right into it. I think a good place to start is just looking over the AP poll this week. Of course, there's been a little bit of movement. There's been a couple games that have gone down between some of the top 10, top 15 teams in that range. So I'll ask you first, Josh, does anything stand out right away in
I
this
think
week's
the
AP
AP
poll?
poll is pretty nice. The voters have been really good through for the first like 4 weeks right now. I think
Yeah,
they made a wonderful choice putting Arizona 2 over Houston. Arizona, in my opinion, has the best resume. They have obviously they have three good away wins, which is wild to think about right now. They can add to it as time goes on. Their non-conference doesn't just end right here. So they honestly deserve 11 first place votes and the second place over Houston, who can obviously return to that, if not take over the number one spot if they win at Players Era this week. I think outside of that, keeping UConn the top five was pretty interesting. I think it's fair just because it's a good loss. It's a really good loss to a really good team, so I can't be that annoyed if they only drop down two. I think Louisville probably should have went up though because they had a good away win at Cincy, and then beyond the top 10 to even top 15, which saw pretty big increases for Michigan State and Alabama following both of their wins. I would say that Kentucky and Texas Tech might be
yeah.
still overranked. They're 19 and 20 apiece. I feel like dropping them more would have been the better option. I don't even know if I could see both of them being ranked in my mind. They just don't really fill the role. And then just outside of that range, I'm not really annoyed about ranking Vanderbilt and Indy for the first time. Indiana is pretty good. I think they're definitely a very underrated team. I'm not so sure about Vanderbilt because they only have one true quad one game on their resume, but I probably would have had Georgetown here at that 24-25 spot because they've looked wonderful. And I think the others receiving votes are looking great as well, and they should be mentioned over time.
You hit on it very quickly. I think the two that jump out to me is Kentucky and Texas Tech both falling. Texas Tech, I think this was something that was more so expected on me and Josh's end. If you've watched our videos over the offseason, we were definitely not too high on the Red Raiders going into the season because we knew JT Toppin was going to get his on a night-to-night basis. But if you neutralize Christian Anderson, then they don't really got too much outside of those two. Donovan Atwell, I will give him credit. He did hit the three straight threes to start the game for Texas Tech against Purdue in the Baja Mar championship game. But I mean, again, outside of that, you just don't have any prolonged viable scoring options really outside of Anderson. And you know JT Top is going to perform night in, night out. But if you can't get any contributions outside of him, then it's going to be tough to win. And I kind of expect these tough games to persist over the course of Big 12 play for Texas Tech. Kentucky, this is definitely something that's been really shocking, I think, for me. I understand they're not fully healthy. I understand Mark Pope's still kind of figuring things out. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. But, his post-game press conferences, he really just looks defeated. And we'll touch on this once we get into the Champions Classic takeaways coming up. Outside of that, though, like you mentioned, I think there's an argument to be made for Georgetown to be ranked. I really think Georgetown has been one of the biggest surprises of the college basketball season start. Indiana, love seeing them get ranked. I've been really high on the Hoosiers to start the year. Lamar Wilkerson, Tucker DeVries, Connor
Oh, right,
Edwards.
right. Yes, my bad.
Yeah, that trio has had a really good start to the season. And really outside of that, like you talked about, I'm pretty there on the top 10. I think we're in store for Michigan to probably fall, drop a couple games coming up. We'll see what happens with that. But overall, like you mentioned, I think the voters have done a really good job with the first couple AP polls to start the year.
Yeah, no, I really feel like this is going to go well. Although I will say, with how this next week will be played out, we really have to see. The poll could be very different this week from
Yeah,
last, with Feast Week fast approaching. And
most
already,
definitely.
already here, we're recording this halfway through the first day of Players Era. We just wrapped the first game of Maui, so things are looking pretty interesting as they always do.
Yeah, so now to get into some of our takeaways from the State Farm the State Farm Champions Classic. First game of the night was Michigan State against Kentucky. Definitely, I think a little bit of a shocker for some people. I definitely thought that Michigan State had full opportunity to win that game, and they went in and did it, and they looked really, really good. They won the game in dominant fashion. Kentucky kind of looks like a mess right now. We'll kind of see if Mark Pope can get the train back on the rails because it seems like it could be falling apart really quickly.
Yeah, no, there are some really big questions around honestly both teams because I really
Yeah,
now
yeah,
wonder what Michigan State's ceiling is. This team feels very similar actually to last year's team. They have that star freshman followed by nice play from old timers and fears in Carson Cooper. And then honestly surprisingly good transfers. Kurtang had a great game. And you like to
yeah.
see that off of guys that, Izzo's not really used to tracking with transfers, and here he is producing for probably the first time in his career, in my opinion. So you do like to see something like that. Um, but yeah, no, Kentucky's obviously the real big question in this matchup. I don't know what they do now. This is a really just atrocious loss to pick up this early in the year. They have to play some really good games going forward, and they have the competition to play it. But this was personally my team to win the SEC. This was like Final Four team for me. I'm mostly out on them at the moment. I really don't know what they can do to recover personally, but I really think it starts with Mark Pope. I think, and this is a press conference video that was released. He didn't have the confidence. He did not feel like he was doing the right job as a coach, and that's not something you want to show off to a very hungry fan base that felt very good about
Yeah.
last year. You don't want to be in a year two slump, and it looks like a year two slump is on the way for the Wildcats, which is a big shame.
Yeah, the way it looks right now, I'm just don't know if I can see the path if their current play persists over the course of once we get into SEC play and into March. I just don't think I see them as the Final Four contender that everyone expected them to be going into the season. I just think that a lot of it is, yeah, you can go out and spend money. You can get the best players available, but they got to fit. And right now, they just don't look like they fit all together. And that was probably the biggest concern I had for Kentucky going into the year. Yes, you have 1 through 14. They can all play, probably start on a lot of the high major rosters around the country, but there's only one basketball. And you got too many cooks in the kitchen right now. I'd argue Denzel Aberdeen, who honestly might have, like, I think there's an argument to be made that he probably wasn't going to be a starter for them going into the year. He's probably been their best player. Otega always been a little disappointing. Colin Chandler has been good offensively, but really he's kind of a liability on defense. And just really Mark Pope, he came out and said that he wishes he was further along with the group than he is right now. And he needs to figure out how to get everyone on the same page. It is also a matter of getting guys back and healthy. Jaden Quaidance, I think, is going to be a difference maker defensively. And I mean, this is a guy that could potentially go in the lottery this year. So if he's being advertised as that good of a player, he can definitely turn things around for the Wildcats. But to get onto your point regarding Michigan State's ceiling, if they could get consistent shooting the way that they shot the basketball against Kentucky, then they're a Final Four team. I mean, you know what they are defensively. Right now, I believe they are ranked 49th on KenPom offensively. I kind of forget off the top of my head. But so they got a lot of ground to cover regarding their offense. But again, you have Jeremy Fears, who's one of the better passing point guards in the sport. Jackson Kohler is a great dimension to have in the post. I mean, he played outstanding against Kentucky. I believe he finished with 21 points in that game. Can space the floor. There were several instances where not only him, but Kurt Tang, like you mentioned, had a good shooting night. But both of those guys were really able to get Kentucky defenders off the floor with their head fakes and getting to a sidestep three that you got out Kurt Tang, or getting to the mid range, which Jackson Kohler was able to do. You mentioned Carson Cooper. Cohen Carr. I just think, Tom Izzo had a quote about how in an era where everyone's going to the transfer portal, he's going to trust his core guys to be his core guys, and he's just going to supplement role players that, he can find in the portal, which is what you're getting out of Kurt Tang, who can shoot the basketball. You'd like to see Trey Fort play a little bit better than what he did to start the year, but he did hit some big shots against Kentucky in that game. But overall, I think the Spartans look really, really good, and they got some big opportunities to pick up some more big wins in the non-conference schedule.
No, I definitely agree with you. And what do you take away from the other game in that classic between Duke and Kansas?
I think I took away more good about Kansas than anything else, really. Just to be able to fight and really play just as hard as you can in a game that really no one gave you any chance in being in. I mean, without Darren Peterson, your 5-star freshman, someone who could go number one in the NBA draft, I think I took a lot of good away from that. Trey White played outstanding in that game. And I give a lot of credit to Bill Self for finding guys that take pride in wearing the Kansas jersey as opposed to kind of what it was last year. I almost felt in a way Kentucky this year is in a similar situation to what Kansas was in last year, where you go out and get some of the high profile transfers and you look like one of the top rosters in the country going into the year. But the pieces have to fit. And for Kansas last year, they didn't fit. Zeke Mayo, AJ Storr, Rylan Griffin, Hunter Dickinson, they're all great players, but they just didn't fit cohesively in a way that led to winning basketball games. This year, it's different. It is still more or less Darren Peterson and company. But at the same time, if you have one stud surrounded by guys who can make shots, play defense, play with energy, then that's a really good recipe for Bill Self to, hopefully make a second weekend this year. I don't think they're a Final Four contender, but I still think seeing the fight out of the guys without Darren Peterson in that game was really, really impressive to see.
Yeah, no, I definitely get down on your point. I do feel like there are definitely concerns with Kansas playing consistently without Pearson because they are currently and will be playing without Pearson for all of players era, which is a huge problem. They can win their games against Kansas and Syracuse and possibly play a consolation third game. Like the opportunities are still very much there, but I'm not so convinced otherwise. But they do look good, and I will say we mentioned this off recording, but Duke's schedule looks worse now more than ever,
Yeah.
despite the fact that they do play a lot of nice, still ranked teams. Obviously, Kansas is their big one so far, but Texas doesn't look insanely good since that first outing, if I'm not wrong. They played Texas Tech, which we've mentioned before. They don't look good in my mind. Arkansas is on a cold streak currently, so they really don't have a true challenge in non-conference. Unfortunately, they still could be challenged. Like Arkansas might pose more of a threat than I'm originally assuming, but as of right now, the schedule that honestly I felt could have been one of the best in the country is turning out to be a great disappointment for them, and it doesn't help in the long run because it's not gonna be viewed the same way that it could have been had these teams actually stayed good for long.
I think by far now their best game of their non-conference schedule is going to be against Michigan State, and that's definitely a game that Duke needs to win if they want to prove that they can compete against the top flight teams in the country. In terms of my takeaways for Duke, I just came out of that State Farm Classic thinking that Duke is really hard to score on. When they're defending, they're guarding at a high level. They are so hard to score on. It's similar to last year where they had just size at every position. So hard to get around guys with the long wingspan and that play physical. And I just think that if their offense can kind of reach the point to where their defense is right now, and granted, they're both still really good. I think their defense is just slightly ahead of it. Then, I mean, Duke's going to be so hard to beat down the road. But at the same time, you do kind of have to see it against a higher ranked opponent, a team that we know is going to be competing to get to a second weekend to maybe make a Final Four in March, like a Michigan State. Then, I'll be more in on the Blue Devils than what we've kind of seen right now. But nonetheless, they're still undefeated. They still look really, really good. And they are the fourth ranked team in the country for a reason.
Yeah.
But getting on to the next game, we want to touch on really briefly. I did hit on this past week's episode of the Saturdays in Stores podcast. If you are a Husky fan, please go and watch the video. But to really quickly go over it, we had the number 4 ranked Arizona Wildcats playing the number 3 ranked UConn Huskies last week. Before this week's AP poll, obviously, Arizona moved up, UConn fell slightly. But I'll ask you first, Josh, as the non-UConn fan here. Well, what were your takeaways from that game?
I don't fully know how to think about it just because we are missing Terrace Reed from the equation with UConn. The team doesn't look horrible, but at the same time, you play this at Gamble with the expectation to win by not just by a point, but to win it by a decent amount, given that it is a home game and it is a UConn home game as well. And it's very much the opposite. Arizona dominated for most of the game, and they just kept it. They really kept it going for a team that I think a lot of people counted out to start the season, and even counted out going into that game. They have the best resume. There's a reason why they're 2. There's a reason why I said it's worthwhile they get that position. And I honestly feel like now more than ever, you have to represent how good Tommy Lloyd is producing his squad right now in the non-conference. This might be his best team out of all things to say. And it's not just Koa P or Dwayne Aristote or any of the other freshmen. It's Jaden Bradley. Jaden Bradley is acting like the second best player in the country behind Braden Smith, which is insane. Like we said, I think on our previous podcast, he had no preseason rankings. He was not
Yeah.
predicted to be a top scorer for any program at any point. And here he is playing the best brand of basketball he could ever play, in my personal opinion. He is leading this team to a possible Final Four contention. Like I don't know if this team can win a natty, but they're making it close. They're making it act like a very different Florida team from usual, in my opinion. And I'm very excited to see where this squad goes. And, for UConn's sake, Terrace will be back soon. I'm not horribly worried, but as an outsider, this was not the game to drop, especially considering how tough their schedule is going forward.
Again, a lot of these points I hit on the Saturdays and Stores podcast, but I got to give Tommy Lloyd so much credit. I never really ever viewed him in a light of being the greatest X's and O's guy, but with the job he did in a way imitating the what Creighton does defensively against UConn in the past several years with Ryan Kalkbrenner, where you chase guys over the top of ball screens and funnel them into the paint to try to challenge a 7-footer or force you into taking a 10 to 15-foot midi. Just those are shots that in the current way basketball's played, they're not high, they're not great efficient shots, they're not high percentage. And so I got to give Tommy Lloyd a lot of credit. They knew that if they could neutralize the 3-point shot, which they did, Solo Ball couldn't get it going from three. Alex Caravan couldn't get it going from three. Then, Tommy Lloyd, again, the Wildcats, they neutralized the 3-point shot and they forced it to be won inside the paint. And in a way, UConn, like Dan Hurley said in his post-game presser, they got punked on the glass. Arizona was up 20 rebounds in the margin in that category. And of course, without Terrace Reed, it's going to be tough to win the rebounding battle on the glass with the freshman center Eric Reiba, who I do think that was one of my big takeaways. I think it's good that he got the experience, and to see him have the moments he did offensively, I think it's going to do so much for his confidence and his development over the course of the season, because you get a tandem of Terrace Reed when he's back and healthy and Eric Reiba, then that puts you in a good position going into March if Eric can provide you a lot scoring wise offensively, and try to become a little bit more disciplined on the defensive end, be a little bit tougher when boxing out. Overall, I do think, like you said, it was at Gamble. That's probably a game you shouldn't lose. And that was a game that you had a lot of opportunities to win, especially when you took the lead after going on that run after facing the 13-point deficit. Overall, though, you win on the glass, you hit your free throws, you probably come out with a win in that game. But overall, being down two starters in Terrace Reed and Braylon Mullins, it's not the worst loss in the world. I think, of course, at home, you probably should win the game. And now that loss places a much larger emphasis on winning the rest of your non-conference schedule. But overall, it's a tough loss to stomach, but it's going to give the Hurley and his staff a lot of motivation going forward to put on the players in the film sessions to try and close out the non-conference schedule undefeated.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. How do you feel about Texas Tech Purdue for the Baja Mar Championship?
Texas Tech Purdue, again, kind of like we mentioned in the beginning of the episode, we weren't very high on Texas Tech going into the year. I thought that was the perfect example as to why. JT Toppin played quite well in that game, although he kind of got off to a slow start. Nonetheless, Christian Anderson was pretty much neutralized. He really could never get it going. Donovan Atwell had the hot start going 3 for 3 to start, but following that, I don't even know if he finished making another three following those three he had at the beginning. And just Purdue, I mean, they're by far the best offensive team in the country. What they have with Braden Smith, who is the best passer in the sport, I think one of the best passers I've ever seen at any level of basketball. CJ Cox was outstanding in Baja Mar. He really contributed, and he hit some big shots against Texas Tech. Fletcher Lawyer lit it up as well. I thought what you got at Oscar Clough in the championship game of Baja Mar was also impressive as well. He finished with a double-double, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and then Trey Kaufman ran, of course, he's one of the most consistent players that you will find across college basketball. Overall, Purdue looks like the team to beat for me right now. I think they're both there offensively, and if they can defend the way that they did against Texas Tech, against some of the guards like Christian Anderson, Donovan Atwell, Lawan Watts, then Purdue's going to be in a really good spot. And they're just going to be so tough to beat. They are now top 25 defensively on KenPom. I believe they came in at 19th this week. So that's definitely something to watch out for if they can continue to rise in that metric. And again, I in my book, Purdue is a team to beat right now.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you on that point as well. Yeah, Texas Tech's on fraud watch for sure. They are not the team that a lot of people are viewing them as personally. They were down 32 at one point to Purdue, which, like, you just can't have that. You really can't lose by that much and expect to be viewed in an even similar way. Like they were expected to lose. If they lost by 15, it would have been all right. They lost by nearly double that, and you just can't have that in any true scenario, especially if you're trying to have a JT top and player of the year candidacy afloat, and it's floating, but it's not keeping up, especially when you consider that Braden Smith played better than Toppin on that day, and Smith was not really much of a factor in that game, in my opinion. I really felt that he didn't even need to be, which is crazy to think about. If the best player in the country does not need to play for the team to win, what do you think that makes that team? That team is unstoppable by almost any metric and almost any challenge, and I'm very excited to see where Purdue goes. They have a decent continuation to non-con, and obviously so does Texas Tech. So we're going to
Right.
have to see, but it's all Boilers at number one right now.
Yeah. And one more game which we want to hit on really quickly is the Alabama Illinois game, which we kind of forgot to mention, followed the UConn Arizona game last Wednesday night. Alabama took home the win 90-86. And let me just say, LeBaron Philon looks like the front runner for the SEC Player of the Year trophy. I don't think neither me or Josh gave LeBaron Fallon the credit he deserved going into the year. I was leaning more towards Tahad Pettiford. Of course, if you've kept up with the channel, you know how much of a fan of Tahad I am. I think you were kind of in the boat of Otega Owe, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
I had because I was very convinced that Kentucky was going to be that team, and I think just replace Kentucky with Alabama. Everything I expected from Kentucky is now everything I'm seeing in Alabama, which is insane to think about if you're going to ask me.
Yeah, and I mean, I just think that for Alabama to make the final, or they don't necessarily need that to make the Final Four because they made the Final Four without it 2 years back. If they can improve as a defense, then Alabama has full opportunity to win a national championship. I believe they are top 35 on KenPom defensively right now. If they can get into that top 25, there's a real argument to be made that they could be one of the true contenders to win a national championship. They're just so hard to guard off the dribble. We saw it against St. John's. We saw it against Purdue, even though Purdue took home the win in that game, and we saw it against Illinois. And to have the dimension of three different guys who can all create their own shot between Philon, Holloway, Latrell Wrightsell, and then what you have with, role players spurted throughout, like Aiden Sherrill, who's been great in the front court this year. Taylor Bolt-Bowens had good moments. London Jemison, along with Houston Millette, they've hit shots as well. Again, I think it's going to come down to the defense for Nate Oates' team this year, but offensively, they are just so fun to watch. It's almost a pro-style offense in a way, and I think that in order to be Alabama right now, you're going to have to outscore them if your defense isn't there. And that's kind of the boat Illinois is in. I was kind of curious to see if Illinois can continue the defensive performance they put on Texas Tech in the game that they played. I should say, their previously ranked game prior to this one, where I thought obviously Kylan Boswell was kind of advertised as your go-to point of attack defender. But I thought Stojakovic defended Christian Anderson very, very well. That might be attributed to just the Texas Tech not having guys outside of Anderson on the perimeter that you really have to worry about. But definitely, I think Illinois needs to get better defensively. I also think that something that I've noticed this year is the Visage brothers tend to struggle to grab rebounds. I feel like there's not a lot of times that I've seen them end the game with double-digit rebounds this year. Honestly, I don't know that if either of them. I understand Tomislav has been kind of battling the injury, and he came off the bench in this game. I'm not sure if going forward, Brad Underwood's rolling with Big Z over Tomislav. Nonetheless, those guys got to pull down more rebounds. I mean, Merkovich, he's kind of, I think he is the leading rebounder for the Illini right now. And I mean, outside of him, who's really been everything you could have asked for out of him offensively to start the year, him, Stojakovic, just continue to score really, really well. He's now in the starting lineup after kind of easing his way back in, coming off the bench, specifically against Texas Tech. He did that and scored 23. He had 26 in this game against Alabama. Alan Boswell, I think, has looked like one of the better players in the sport to start the year. He had 22 in that game, but I think offensively, you're fine. We kind of knew that was the boat Illinois was going to be in. It was going to come down to the defense, and right now they're just not there defensively. They got a big test coming up on Friday, Black Friday, I should say, against UConn. Both two teams coming off a ranked loss, and there's going to be a lot of motivation on both sides to hopefully pull out a win for what might be a top 5 spot in next week's poll.
No, I definitely agree with you. And this is definitely the big test for both teams. I personally didn't see Alabama winning this game because it was, it was in Chicago. It really felt like a place
Right.
that
Sort
Bama
of home game.
wasn't going to get used to. But Bama's a road dog in the same way that Arizona is. Somehow they lose to Purdue and win on the road in the same week span, which is just crazy to think about. Nate Oates has another dog squad. Like Kanaye said, I didn't think LeBaron Philon was the real deal. He and Aiden Holloway are playing like first team all SEC, and honestly, Phylon's playing like a possible first team All American at this point,
Yeah,
especially if they do end up winning the SEC, which it looks like they're now the favorites because Florida and Kentucky have pretty much fallen out of that place. And I'm very curious. I am so curious about where this team goes in the future. And for Illinois, I'm not annoyed. Stojakovic looked really good in that game. I am worried, obviously, about the Ibisic brothers themselves, but the Balkan Five is a squad, and Boswell definitely rounds them out pretty well.
yeah,
I am concerned though as to the ceiling for this team under Brad Underwood. Underwood has not had a one seed ever. I don't think Illinois can do that necessarily, but if they want to stick around for a possible two seed, it's still up in the air. But this was a must win game to retain that spot. But like you said before, they have UConn that they could possibly beat to change that around.
I am also curious to see how Mihailo Petrovic's role evolves over the course of the year. I felt in the limited minutes he played against Alabama, the offense in a way kind of ran a lot better than when it did when he was off the floor. I think he won't finish with 5 to 6 assists in that game. So that's definitely going to be something to watch because that was one of the most talked about international prospects coming over to the States over the offseason. And there was the whole situation that went down with him being deemed eligible or not. So that's definitely something to watch for. Just before we wrap things up, I want to throw it over to you, Josh. Were there any MT games upcoming this week that you wanted to shout out?
Well, obviously, got to shout out Players Era.
Right, right.
Probably one of the biggest tournaments of all time at this level of the year.
Yeah, fair to say.
I don't really know who to pick in this scenario. I feel like anybody from Houston to Gonzaga to Tennessee to possibly a resurgent Alabama or Michigan could take the crown here. A lot of things are going to be decided and will be decided. I'm very excited to see how this tournament works out for pretty much every team minus like Rutgers involved. There could be some very big upsets and it will define the AP poll for months to come. And then outside of that, you do have the Maui Invitational, the Classic. It's unfortunately not the best one, but we've already seen some, insane changes here with Seton Hall taking down NC State, the very first
Right.
ranked team
Yeah.
to lose to an unranked team. But we still have to see who tops that. I personally had NC State. I think I have to switch possibly to Seton Hall themselves, but USC looks really good right now, and so does Texas and Arizona State if they want to stay alive and in the bubble. Beyond that, there's also the Thanksgiving Classic between Duke and Arkansas and Oklahoma State and Northwestern. So you get your levels of madness at the higher and lower bubble levels. And then the ESPN Events Invitational. There's multiple brackets for it, but I would pay attention to the Magic bracket. This takes place from the 27th to the 28th. This is BYU, Miami, Georgetown, and Dayton. So 3 to 4 teams that could end up making the tournament at this point, particularly BYU. We have to see if they win this one, but Georgetown and Miami look like pretty good competitors. And then beyond that, if you want to look for a mid-major, high-major combination event, look for Battle of Atlantis. That is a classic. Once again, not as good as they used to be, which is a big shame. Western Kentucky, Vanderbilt, which is now ranked, VCU, which looks all right, South Florida, which is a high level mid major, Virginia Tech, which has Neo Avdilas and should be a bubble team right now, Wichita State, which is undefeated and possibly competing to win the MVC, Colorado State, and St. Mary's, which honestly they could be ranked by the end of this week. So it could be a good sign for the higher level mid majors and high major teams that are trying to compete for the bubble. But I would definitely pay attention to, out of all things, just Players Era and, a couple surrounding events. And I'm sure I missed one or two that you could probably name off in the comments if you so pleased.
Yeah, I mean, like you touched on, Players Era is the main highlight of this week. If you are a college basketball fan, please, please, please tune into Players Era because it's going to be madness in November. Of course, I'll say now and it won't happen, but a hypothetical matchup against Gonzaga and Houston for the Players Era championship would be one that I look forward to a lot. And but Gonzaga is my pick to win Players Era. I just think that they got grown men and they look like one of the best teams in the country. I think there's a real opportunity that they grab a 1 seed going to the tournament this year. But I think that's pretty much going to take care of everything we had for you guys on this weekly episode today. As always, please do anything you can to engage with the content you see on this channel. College basketball season is off to a great start, and Feast Week is just starting. So definitely be on the lookout for more content from us and just for a really great continued college basketball season overall. But until next episode, we'll see you guys next time.